All right, we've been given the all clear. We can go ahead and proceed with the round.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's call the case of Stevie Rogers versus Drew Mars. My name is Samantha Bateman, and I'll be your presiding judge. Scoring judges, it looks like you've already done so, but just a reminder, please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen and keep your audio and video off unless our bailiff tells you otherwise. We've all also, I believe, set our video to hide all non-video participants, which means that the only people on the screen right now should be the two pretrial advocates and me. And a reminder to everyone to please silence your phones and any notifications on your computer that might pop up. The attorneys, please make appearances for the record.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Bree Goodchild. Today I'm joined with my co-counsel, Mr. Riley Weiberg.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
And today we represent the plaintiff, Ms. Stevie Rogers, who is present with us today as well.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Ms. Rogers. Attorneys for the defense.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Edward Nolan, and today I'm accompanied by my co-counsel, Mr. Jeffrey Ecker.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
And we're here representing the defendant in today's case, Ms. Drew Mars.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Ms. Mars. Are there any pretrial matters to take up before we begin?
Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff has a few. First, we would like to direct your attention to the pretrial order listed by the Honorable Judge Parker Page. Per her prior ruling, she's already ruled that Exhibits 1 through 7 are pre-admitted in today's case, and thus can be used at any time throughout trial without laying additional foundation.
I assume there's no objection from the defense.
That's our understanding of the ruling, Your Honor. There's no objection.
All right, so noted.
We'd also like to direct your attention to rulings 20 and 22. These together outline that the lead investigator in today's case, Detective Noor Khan, is unavailable to testify, and thus Private Investigator Bond is allowed to testify to the contents of her investigative report, which is also pre-admitted as exhibit number 6 in today's proceedings.
All right, so noted.
And with that, we'd also like to invoke Rule 615 that calls for the constructive sequestration of all witnesses save for party representatives. And as noted before, Ms. Rogers will be our representative in today's case.
That's fine. Ms. Rogers and Ms. Mars can remain. The other witnesses will be constructively sequestered.
And with that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed with openings.
All right, anything from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to invoke Rule 603, constructively swearing in all witnesses for purposes of time.
That'll be fine. We'll assume that they have been sworn.
And Your Honor, we ask that when presenting evidence that has not been admitted already, that we be able to present it in the view screen and that it may be seen outside of the earshot of or eyeshot of the jury constructively.
Yes, we'll assume that it's shown only to the bench and then published constructively to the jury when it's admitted.
With that, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed.
All right, we'll hear opening statements first from the plaintiff.
May I proceed?
Yes, and just a reminder to everyone to please make sure that they're in speaker view right now using the button in the upper right of your screen. And attorneys, unless you're the one giving the speech or presentation, please make sure to mute your audio when the other attorneys are speaking. With that, please proceed.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Today you're going to hear the story of Agatha Lee, a famous author who penned the novel Death in a Bottle. An 82-year-old woman who lived right here in the state of Midlands. Well, that was until August 14th of 2018, when she was found dead, alone, in her room. Now, members of the jury, today you're not going to hear that she died of natural causes. Today you're going to hear that she was poisoned. Poisoned by an individual who was out of time and out of options. The defendant, Drew Mars, Miss Lee's caretaker. Because you're going to hear from Miss Mars, the clock was ticking. See, Miss Mars' younger sister Well, she was sick. And the defendant didn't know how much time she had left and didn't have the money to afford her treatment. But members of the jury, at the time, the defendant had reason to be hopeful because she knew that that year she had been written into the will of Miss Agatha Lee. And if Miss Agatha Lee was to pass away, she would receive upwards of $20 million. But members of the jury, this hope, well, it quickly faded. Because on August 14th of 2018, the defendant overheard a conversation between Agatha Lee and her granddaughter, Stevie Rogers. And you're going to hear that during this conversation, Miss Lee told Miss Rogers that she was going to switch her will from Drew Mars to Stevie Rogers. And when Miss Mars heard that in a matter of days she could be losing out on potentially millions of dollars, that clock, it started ticking a little bit faster. Because the defendant realized that she was running out of options. And it's because of this that she put a plan into action. On August 14th, after she overheard this conversation, she went directly to the pharmacy where she purchased a heartburn medication known as chloroandramine. And then later that night, she snuck into the victim's room and switched her medication because she was out of time and out of options. Members of the jury, this is what brings us to court today. We're here to answer a simple question. Was the defendant responsible for the death of Agatha Lee? But I want to make something very clear. Today's proceeding is not a murder trial. This isn't a criminal case. This is a lawsuit. Because in the state of Midlands, there's a statute called the Slayer Statute that states if an individual causes the death of another individual, they cannot receive any of their estate. So it's quite simple. In today's case, the plaintiff must prove by the preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, that on August 14th, the defendant took action that led to the death of Miss Lee. And members of the jury, we intend to show this to you today because we will show that Miss Mars had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to commit this crime. You're going to hear from the defendant herself. She's going to take that stand. She's going to take an oath. And she's going to look you right in the eyes. She's going to tell you that she knew the victim was deathly allergic to chloroandramine. She knew that chloroandramine looked identical to the arthritis medication she had been administering to Miss Lee for years. And she's going to tell you that after she heard the conversation between Miss Rogers and Miss Lee, she went to the pharmacy. And members of the jury, despite what the defense is going to tell you today, we know exactly what she bought. Because when the police searched her room after Miss Lee was found dead, they found something in her closet. You're going to hear that they found a black bag with the defendant's fingerprint on it and a bottle of chloroandramine pills. Members of the jury, the defendant was out of time. She was out of options. And that's why when she was given the choice between essentially saving her sister's life and the life of Agatha Lee, well, she picked her family. And that's why at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Bree Goodchild, is going to come before you. And she's going to ask you to hold the defendant responsible. She's going to ask you that you find her liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Opening statement from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, please.
You're going to learn today that a lot of what Mr. Weiberg just told you is not true. Money didn't matter to Miss Mars nearly as her relationship to Miss Lee did. Miss Lee was like a grandmother to her. Miss Lee had no intention of changing her will, and thus Miss Mars had no reason to want to kill someone she loved so dearly. But Mr. Weiberg was right about one very important fact. Agatha Lee was killed, and she was killed for money. But not by Miss Mars. No, today you're going to learn that Agatha Lee was killed by Stevie Rogers and her accomplice, Mr. Bond. Because today you'll learn Stevie Rogers was distanced, disinherited, and desperate. Let's start with that first one, distanced. You'll learn that while Miss Mars lived with and cared for Miss Lee, Miss Rogers was nowhere to be found. Miss Lee would write to no reply, call to no answer. In fact, for a 7-year period, Miss Rogers talked to her grandmother one time. She had distanced herself away. And that only changed after she became disinherited. Because you're going to hear for that entire time that Miss Rogers remained distanced, she was the sole heir to Agatha Lee's fortune, worth around $20 million. But then something changed in February of 2018. You're going to learn that Agatha Lee changed her will, disinheriting Miss Rogers. But at the time, she still had a trust fund. But when that ran out just a couple of months later, Miss Rogers had no money. She had no job and she had no prospects of one. And it was only after she became disinherited that you'll learn she tracked her grandmother down and spent time with her. But then there was a problem. Miss Lee refused to change her will. And you'll learn that on August 14th, after Miss Rogers begged, Miss Lee told her no. And it was at that moment when Miss Rogers became desperate. She was left home alone for a couple hours on August 14th. She knew that Miss Lee took meds every night. She knew where she took them, and she knew that Miss Lee was deathly allergic to the drug chloroandramine. But Miss Rogers also knew about a legal loophole. She knew that if it looked like Miss Mars had killed Agatha Lee, then Miss Rogers would inherit everything as the only surviving relative. And so that night, Miss Lee died from chloroandramine. And in the morning, before anybody from the police had arrived, you're going to learn that someone Miss Rogers had hired had arrived first, Mr. Bond. Mr. Bond had 5 minutes in that house before any police detective showed up. And you're going to learn that he snuck into Miss Mars's bedroom. He went alone, broke into her laptop, and left without anybody noticing. And that's where they would find chloroandramine a week later. Miss Mars loved Agatha Lee. She certainly didn't kill her. But it's the plaintiff's burden to prove to you otherwise. They have to prove to you that Miss Mars killing Agatha Lee is more likely than any alternative explanation. But when they can't do that, because it was Miss Rogers who was distanced, disinherited, and desperate, we're going to ask that you allow Miss Mars to keep what is rightfully hers. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Before the plaintiff calls its first witness, I'd like to ask everyone to please switch their views back from speaker view to gallery view, again, using the button in the upper right of your screen, and this should allow you to see all of the attorneys and witnesses who are participating in this examination at the same time. Plaintiff, you can call your first witness.
Plaintiff calls Stevie Rogers to the stand.
All right, Ms. Rogers, you're presumed sworn and you can proceed.
Good afternoon. Please
Hi.
introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Hi, I'm Stevie Rogers.
Why are you here today, Ms. Rogers?
I'm here to seek justice for my grandmother. She didn't deserve this fate, and she should be here with me right now.
Ms. Rogers, would you mind explaining to the members of the jury who your grandmother is?
My grandmother was the one and only Agatha Lee. She was the famous author who wrote Death in a Bottle, and you may know her.
What was your relationship like with your grandmother?
I was extremely close with her as a kid, and she was always there for me. We would spend time at her house playing games, especially when she would beat me at backgammon. And she was there when I lost both of my parents.
Did you spend a lot of time with your grandmother?
I spent as much time as I could with her. I used to visit her a lot when I was younger, but when I got older, life got in the way and I didn't see her as often.
Why didn't you see your grandmother as often?
I never really got over my parents' death. And that took a toll on me, so I had to drop out of law school because the pressure was too much. So I took some time to travel the world and find myself again. And I even wrote a few novels, just like she did.
Ms. Rogers, to be specific, how long did you go without seeing your grandmother?
I was traveling for about 7 years, and during that time, I didn't see her at all.
How did this affect your relationship?
It didn't. Although I didn't see her as frequently, she would always be the only one who was there for me. And she would send me letters all the time. We're family, and nothing could have ever changed that.
So after 2011, when was the next time you saw your grandmother?
It was the 4th of July, the summer of 2018, exactly.
What happened when you saw her?
I was welcomed with open arms, and it was like I never left. Nana realized I needed a place to stay because I'd been traveling for so long, and she told me I could stay for as long as I wanted.
Now, Ms. Rogers, to clarify for the members of the jury, why did you come back?
I came back because it was my parents' 10th anniversary, the 10th anniversary of their death, and I needed to see my only family again, and I needed to see my Nana.
Ms. Rogers, I'm going to move forward and talk about your grandmother's will. Are you aware of who was supposed to be her sole heir initially?
Yes. When my parents died, I was the sole beneficiary.
Do you know if this ever changed?
I do. She wrote me a letter while I was traveling, and it stated that she was removing me as her sole heir.
Did she tell you who she was naming her sole heir?
She did. The letter said she was planning on making Drew Mars her personal caretaker, her sole inheritor.
Ms. Rogers, let's take a second and talk about your relationship with Drew Mars. Now, when you returned to Miss Lee's house, how did Miss Mars interact with you?
I always felt she felt threatened by me. She would always eavesdrop in my conversations or
Speculation to Miss Mars feeling threatened by Stevie Rogers.
Response?
Your Honor, this is based on the witness's rationally based perspective. She's not testifying to the mindset. She's just saying what she felt when she would interact with Miss Mars.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
A feeling of being threatened is testifying to the mindset of another individual. And that's not a rationally based perception. No perception that you can see unless if Miss Mars directly told Miss Rogers at would lend towards a rationally based perception that someone else was threatened by her. It's
Your Honor, may be heard on those grounds.
Yes, one final response.
Your Honor, if the witnesses or if Miss Mars was giving off vibes or signals of her being threatened or being short with Miss Rogers, it would be a rational conclusion that Miss Rogers could reach that she felt threatened by her.
I'm going to sustain the objection and strike the word threatened, but you can ask Miss Rogers what she observed of Miss Mars's demeanor and how she interacted.
Absolutely, Your Honor. Miss Rogers, without delving into the mindset of Miss Mars, how did she treat you when you returned?
She would always eavesdrop and interrupt my conversations with Nana. And she would always ask me when I would be leaving. It felt weird to me.
Now, Miss Rogers, when you returned to Lee Manor, did your grandmother ever bring up her will?
She did on one of our normal breakfast dates.
I want to clarify something for the members of the jury. During the time that you had been back at Lee Manor, had you ever brought up the will?
I never did.
From the time you were disinherited, did you ever ask your grandmother about the will?
Not once.
From the time you were disinherited, did you even ask her for any money?
No.
So let's talk about that conversation when your grandmother brought up her will. When was this?
This was during our normal breakfast dates, and she told me she was going to meet with a lawyer and switch the will back over to me.
And during this conversation, what was your grandmother's demeanor like?
It was very emotional. We were both crying, and she kept saying how happy she was that since I had returned.
Miss Rogers, after your grandmother told you that she was going to switch her will, what happened next?
We hugged, and as I was leaving, I opened the door and I saw Drew Mars standing directly in front of the door.
Let's talk about your interaction with Miss Mars. When you ran into the defendant, what did she look like?
She looked angry and she was red in the face. Her fists were clenched.
Did she say anything to you?
She just shook her head and mouthed no way at me.
Miss Rogers, let's move forward later in that day. What were you doing in the evening?
Nana and I were watching this mystery film that she loved so much, and we ate dinner and just hung out until Nana went to sleep around 9:30, I would say.
When your grandmother went to sleep, what did you do?
I went downstairs and continued writing on my novels. And while I was at it, I poured myself a drink.
Miss Rogers, when you were walking down the stairs, did you see anyone?
I did. I noticed Drew leaving her room, but I don't think she saw me.
Now I want to talk about where you saw the defendant walking. Do you know what time this was at?
This was just after my grandmother had gone to sleep, so between 9:35 and 9:40 in the evening.
Do you know where the defendant was heading towards?
I'm not exactly sure. She walked away from the stairs and was heading towards Nana's room.
When you looked at the defendant, could you see if she was holding anything?
Yes, it looked like she was holding something small in her fist, but I'm not exactly sure as to what she was holding.
Miss Rogers, let's move forward to the next day. How did your morning start?
I was trying to finish off reading Death in a Bottle, and then I heard pounding at my door. Mars said Nana wasn't waking up, and I panicked and I rushed over to Nana's room.
Miss Rogers, what happened when you got over to your grandmother's room?
I went to check for a pulse. and there was nothing there. She wasn't breathing.
Thank you for your time. I have no further questions at this time.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Go ahead.
Miss Rogers, let's talk about your relationship with your grandmother. Now, in 2011, you dropped out of law school.
I did, yes. The pressure got too much and I needed to find myself.
And after you dropped out of law school, you didn't see your grandmother again until 2018.
I needed to find myself, and I spent those years traveling, so no, I didn't see her for that period of time.
But your grandmother, she tried to stay in touch.
She sent me letters all the time, and I called her.
Well, to be clear, she wrote you letters, right?
Yes,
And she tried calling you.
yes.
Miss Rogers, you never wrote your grandmother back.
I couldn't have written her back. There was no return address. I think she did that intentionally to play with me.
You never wrote her back, yes or no?
I couldn't have.
Miss Rogers, you never picked up the phone when she called.
I was traveling so much that I guess I got life get in the way.
Miss Rogers, you never picked up the phone, yes or no?
I wasn't able to know.
In fact, for that 7-year stretch, you talked to your grandmother one time.
I knew that I had to call her for her birthday, so yes, I made sure I was able to call her then.
You only talked to her one time in that 7-year stretch, right?
I did, but our relationship was so much stronger than just connecting over emails and letters and phone messages.
Miss Rogers, just bringing you back to my question. You talked to her one time in that 7-year stretch, yes or no?
Yes,
All right, and now in July of 2018, you decided to return back to her house, right?
the 10th anniversary of my parents' death came, and I just needed my family. I needed my nana.
Miss Rogers, that's when you went home, yes or no?
Yes,
All right, I'd like to talk about the timing of that decision a little bit more. Now, back in 2011, when you stopped talking to your grandmother, you were still in her will at that time, right?
at the time I believe so. I've never really questioned her about her will.
Back in 2011, it was your understanding that if she died, you would inherit everything.
At them points in time, but I never really spent time thinking about money.
Just to be clear, in 2011, you knew that if she died, you'd inherit everything.
Which is what the will states, yes.
And then in February of 2018, she changed her will.
I received a letter from her explicitly saying that. So yes, I did know that.
She told you you had been disinherited.
That's what the letter said, yes.
But at that time, you still had a trust fund, right?
The money my parents left me, yes, I did.
And originally, that trust fund was worth around $2 million.
Yeah,
That trust fund allowed you to travel the world.
finding myself was very important to me, so
And then in June of 2018, that trust fund ran out, right?
I still had some money left, but it was diminishing.
No, in June of 2018, Miss Rogers, your trust fund ran out, right?
Oh, yes, the trust
At
fund.
that
Yes.
point, you had almost no cash to your name, right?
I didn't have any physical cash, but I had a lot of material things that, if need be, I could get some money from them.
You had almost no cash to your name, yes or no?
Yes.
And it was at the point when you had no cash to your name that you went to see your grandmother, right?
I don't think that's not the conclusion I'm trying to. That's not the right conclusion. It was the 10th anniversary of my parents' death, and I needed to see my nana. I needed to talk to her.
Miss Rogers, I'm just asking about the sequence of events. And it was after you had almost no cash to your name that you went to see your grandmother, yes or no?
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about August 14th. You had a conversation with your grandmother,
I did, yes.
and afterwards she went to lunch.
She went with Mars. Yes, she did.
You were left alone in that house for a couple of hours.
I spent most of the time reading and writing, switching in between the two.
There are no cameras in that house.
Not to my knowledge, no.
The only person with a lock on their door was your grandmother.
Yes.
But there are actually two different ways to get into your grandmother's bedroom, right?
Yes.
Now, Miss Mars or Miss Rogers, you also knew that your grandmother took pills every night, right?
She did, and I guess that comes with age.
And you knew that your grandmother kept those pills right by her bedside table every night, right?
Yes, she would always remind me when she had to go take her pills.
And like clockwork, you knew she took those pills right before she went to bed.
Yes,
You knew she went to bed around 10 to 10:30, right?
about that time, yes.
So let's talk about chloroangemine. You knew your grandmother was deathly allergic to chloroangemine.
I did. Mars had brought up the conversation about it earlier. I didn't know prior to her telling me.
Well, she told you before your grandmother died, right?
Yes.
You knew one pill could kill your grandmother.
I did know that, yes.
And it's an over-the-counter medication.
Yes, it is. That's what Mars told me.
That means you don't need a special prescription to buy some in a pharmacy, right?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And you knew all this information about chloroangemine when you were alone in that house on August 14th.
I did, but that never came to mind.
Just to be clear, you knew that information on August 14th, right?
I did.
So let's talk about that new will your grandmother wrote. You knew as it currently read, Miss Mars would inherit everything if your grandmother died, right?
That's what the letter stated, but our relationship wasn't based on money, so it wasn't a problem.
To be clear, that was your understanding of the will. Miss Mars would get everything, right?
Yes,
But you also knew about this thing called a Slayer statute, right?
I did. I learned about it in my wills classes when I was still in law school.
Right. And in law school, you learned that if somebody kills someone, they're not allowed to inherit anything from that person's estate, right?
That's correct, yes.
So you knew if it looked like Miss Mars had killed Agatha Lee, all of Miss Lee's money would go to you as her only surviving relative.
I did, but it's not about that.
Just to be clear, that's what you knew, right?
Yes,
And on August 14th, when you were alone in that household, you had already learned all of this information, right?
I did.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
You can proceed.
Ms. Rogers, Mr. Ecker just came before you and he asked you a lot of questions about chloroangemine. And I just want to make a couple of things clear for the members of the jury. Do you know which medications your grandmother was on?
I don't know the exact medications
Objection, Your
now.
Honor, outside the scope of direct examination.
Response?
Your Honor, opposing counsel was alleging during their cross-examination that this witness replaced the arthritis medication inside of Miss Lee's room. This is within the scope. I'm just asking the witness if they had knowledge to what medications the witness or Miss Lee was on, and therefore whether or not she'd have knowledge of which one she could replace.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, go ahead.
I didn't allege anything. That's for the jury to decide. And I certainly didn't ask any questions about specific medications that Miss Lee took. So therefore, it's outside of the scope of a direct examination to ask this question.
I think there were some questions about chlorandramine being one of the medications. So for that purpose, I'm going to allow a few questions about this topic.
Ms. Rogers, were you aware of what medications your grandmother was taking?
I never knew exactly. She always let me know that she had to take her medicine at a specific time.
Do you know how many medications she took?
No,
Do you know which medication she took for arthritis?
I was never able to distinguish.
Ma'am, just one last question. Who let you know that your grandmother had an allergy to chlorandramine?
Drew Mars, and she volunteered that information.
No further questions.
All right, any recross?
None, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Ms. Rogers. You can step down. You'll be excused, but you can remain. Does the plaintiff have another witness to call?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Investigator Bond to the stand.
All right, Mr. Bond, you can proceed.
Good afternoon. Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Good afternoon. Name is Minstrel Bond.
What do you do for a living, sir?
I'm an investigator, one of the private persuasion.
Well, what exactly does that mean?
Generally speaking, work in conjunction with the government, local and federal, on a cocktail of cases. Whether that means interviewing witnesses, investigating leads, or collecting evidence, I assist them.
Can you tell us about your experience in this field?
Well, I've been working as a private investigator for nearly 20 years now. It's introduced me to a whole lot of folks, and I've been working on homicide cases, kidnappings, cases of fraud, all sorts of those.
Well, sir, how are you involved in this case?
Well, I received a phone call the morning of August 15th from a Miss Stevie Rogers. She was telling me that world-renowned novelist Agatha Lee had been murdered at her house, so I quickly went over there.
Did you work with anyone else on this case?
I did. After arriving, there was a detective, Khan, who showed up from the Midlands Police. Once she arrived, we worked in a dual detective capacity.
Sir, I want to talk a bit more about how Agatha Lee passed away. During your investigation, did you take any steps to determine a cause of death?
Well, several days after Miss Lee's body was found, she went in for an autopsy report and a toxicology screen down at the Midlands Medical Examiner's office.
What did these reports show?
Now, they showed that she didn't die from natural causes. In fact, she had ingested two 250 milligram pills of chloroandramine.
What is chloroandramine?
Chloroandramine typically is used as a medication for heartburn. Generally, it's not harmless to anybody, but some people, they have fatal allergies to it in very rare cases.
Was that the case for Miss Lee?
It was. I had learned that Miss Lee had actually suffered a heart attack from ingesting chloroandramine several years before.
Objection, lack of foundation.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. This information is contained within Mr. Bond's capacity as an investigator. As he previously testified to, he reviewed the autopsy report and toxicology screenings of Agatha Lee. That information would be contained within that information.
Can you just
May I
lay
be
the
heard?
Yes, go ahead.
I just asked that opposing counsel have this witness lay foundation as to exactly how they gained that information, if it came from an autopsy report or a police report or something like that.
Yeah, if you could just ask a couple of questions to lay that foundation.
Yes, Your Honor, I can certainly clarify. Mr. Bond, you were just telling us about Agatha Lee's medical history. Can you just tell the jury how you know this information?
Yes, since in her autopsy and toxicology screening, it showed that there was chloroandramine present in the system. It also let us know that Agatha Lee had suffered a heart attack from chloroandramine several years before.
Throughout your investigation, did you find any indication that Miss Lee was aware that she had this allergy?
Yes, I did. We found that Miss Lee went to the hospital around the time she suffered a heart attack, and it was also known to us that through the toxicology and autopsy that Miss Mars had been working with them at that time, so she also knew of that fact.
Once you found that there was chloroandramine inside Miss Lee's system when she passed, what was the next step you took in your investigation?
Well, to our knowledge, her daily regimen didn't contain any chloroandramine, so the next question in our investigation was, where did this chloroandramine come from? So we received a warrant and searched through the Lee Manor to see if there was anything we could find there.
Did you find anything?
We did. There were an assortment of pill bottles that we found throughout the entire estate. And so we sent those in back to the Midlands medical examiner's office to determine what those pills were in all of those bottles.
Was the examiner's office able to tell you what kind of medications were in her house?
Well, they did. For the most part, it was all just her regular pills for arthritis, for vitamin B, but there was a bottle of chlorandramine found at the manor.
Where did you find that bottle of chlorandramine?
Oh, the one bottle was found in one room in the manor, in one closet, in one small little black bag. And that room belonged to one Drew Mars.
Sir, once you found a bottle of chlorandramine in the defendant's bedroom, what was the next step in your investigation?
Well, now, we let the forensic evidence do the talking. So we took that black bag in, it was dusted for prints, and only one print was able to be recovered on the zipper of that little black bag.
Just to be clear, sir, who dusted for fingerprints at Lee Manor?
Well, that was Detective Kahn.
And what did those results find?
Detective Kahn, through that dusting, found that the only fingerprint that could be surmised from that bag was one of Miss Drew Mars.
Mr. Bond, I'd like to turn your attention to what happened to the defendant after Agatha Lee passed. Now, were you aware in your investigation about the conditions of Agatha Lee's will?
Yes, there was a will reading several days after Miss Lee passed, in which it came to my attention what exactly that will said.
At the time that Miss Lee passed, what were those conditions?
Well, it stated that the sole beneficiary upon Miss Lee's death would be Drew Mars.
What happened after this was read aloud?
Well, Miss Mars, she jumped out of her seat and said, "I can't believe it," and ran straight out the door. She seemed real surprised, but I almost would have believed her.
What do you mean by that, sir?
Well, earlier on in our investigation, we found some evidence to the contrary that would lead us to believe that Miss Mars was aware of the terms of that will.
Let's talk a bit about that evidence. Mr. Weiberg, if you'd please put Exhibit 13 on the screen. Mr. Bond, could you identify the document in front of us, please?
Yes, that is that email that we found throughout the course of our investigation. One from Miss Mars to one of her friends.
Where did you find this email?
Well, it was on the defendant's laptop.
Does it appear to be in the same condition as when you took the photograph?
Yes, that appears to be the same message we found that day.
Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Is there any objection?
Pursuant to evidentiary ruling 13, there are no objections, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 13 will be admitted and you can publish to the jury.
Mr. Bond, can you tell us how this email influenced your investigation?
Well, at the will reading, we heard Miss Mars say that she couldn't believe that she had just received Miss Lee's entire estate. But since we found this email, that changed things because this email is dated February 1st of 2018.
To be clear, sir, how much earlier was this email sent to when Agatha Lee's will was announced?
That was approximately 6 months before the reading of Agatha Lee's will.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Bond. Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff has no further questions.
All right, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Bond. How you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing excellent. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Nolan.
All right, I got some questions to ask you, and I'd like to start by talking about your relationship with Ms. Stevie Rogers. Now, you first met Ms. Rogers back in June 5th, 2018.
Yes, I believe that was June 5th of 2018. She was looking to find her grandmother.
That's right. She asked you to help find her grandmother.
Correct. She said she was looking for her and hadn't seen her in quite a while.
Now, you spent 2 days looking for her grandmother.
That's right. I was given a letter and quickly realized that it was Agatha Lee's handwriting. And from there, I took off and found her.
And that was a period of 2 days in which you took to find her?
That is correct.
And for those 2 days, you charged Ms. Rogers $10,000.
Well, she told me she would pay me $10,000 to find her grandmother. So those were the terms of the contract.
So that's a yes to my question. You charged her $10,000.
That is correct, sir.
Now, the next time you saw Ms. Rogers was on August 15th, 2018.
That is correct. At Lee Manor after she had called me that morning.
That was about 2.5 months afterwards.
Approximately, yes.
Now, she called you at around 8:45 that morning. Is that fair to say?
I believe so, yes.
When she called you, she told you that her grandmother had been murdered.
That is correct. That's what she told me. That's why I arrived there so fast.
That's right. You dropped everything and went over there immediately.
Well, that's correct.
When you got there, you didn't notice any ambulances present.
No, I did not see any ambulance there.
You didn't see any police officers.
No, Detective Khan didn't show up for another 5 minutes after I arrived.
That's right. When you got there, there was no law enforcement present.
That is correct.
Now, you just mentioned that Detective Khan arrived about 5 minutes after you did.
Correct. Detective Khan from the Midlands Police Department.
And when she arrived, she went over to question Ms. Drew Mars.
I believe she did ask some initial questions that day, yes.
Well, specifically, she went over to question Drew Mars.
Yes.
Now, when she did this, she left you and Ms. Rogers alone.
That is correct.
She left you both alone for about a half hour.
I would say approximately a half an hour or so.
So for approximately a half hour, you were alone with Ms. Rogers while Detective Khan was questioning Ms. Mars.
That is correct.
Now, during that half hour, you broke into the room of Drew Mars.
Well, Miss Mars' door was open, and so I walked in there to take a look around.
So you entered her room without her permission during that half hour.
That is correct.
You broke into her computer during that half hour.
Yes, there wasn't much heavy security on that computer, and I was interested in cracking this case, so I logged into her computer and found that email.
So that's a yes to my question. You broke into her computer during that half hour.
I logged into her computer, yes.
Well, she didn't give you the password, did she?
No, I was able to surmise it on my own.
And once you did that, you went through her emails.
That is correct. That was one of the first emails that was up on the screen, and so I took a picture of it.
Now, during that half hour, you were viewing her emails without permission.
That is correct. She hadn't given me express permission to look at her emails.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the things that you didn't end up doing while you were there. While you were in Ms. Mars's room, you didn't have anybody with you, did you?
No, I did not. The only other person there that wasn't interviewing Miss Mars was Stevie Rogers.
So there was nobody with you while you were in there for that half hour?
No, it would have been inappropriate for Miss Rogers to go into Miss Mars' room at that point.
When you walked in there on August 15th, you didn't have a warrant to search?
No, I did not have a warrant.
And just to be clear, at no point did you get the consent of Ms. Mars?
No, I never spoke with Miss Mars before I entered the room.
Now, you mentioned on direct examination that you worked in a dual detective capacity with Detective Khan.
That is correct.
When you broke into Drew Mars's room, you didn't tell Detective Khan that you'd done that.
No, I had not mentioned to Detective Khan that I went into her room.
You didn't tell Detective Khan that you had broken into her room until 7 days later, did you?
It wasn't until later when they obtained a search warrant to look through the entire house that I let her know that I had seen that email there.
We'll get there in just a minute, but it took you 7 days to let her know that you broke into Drew Mars's room.
I believe it was about that amount of time, yes.
All right, well, we just talked about some of your investigation into Drew Mars. Let's talk about what you did to investigate Ms. Rogers. At no point throughout your investigation did you go through Ms. Rogers' emails.
No, I did not go through Miss Rogers' emails.
At no point did you break into her room without her permission.
No, we were able to go through her room when we obtained a search warrant to look through the entire house.
But prior to that, you didn't break into her room without her permission like you did with Ms. Mars.
Before that, no, I never entered Miss Rogers' room.
Now, at no point in your investigation did you question Ms. Rogers about her knowledge of Agatha Lee's allergies.
Personally, no, I never interviewed Miss Rogers. I believe that was left to the police department to conduct that interview.
At no point throughout your investigation did you question Ms. Rogers regarding her whereabouts at the time of Agatha Lee's death.
I did not personally interview her, no, but the police department did end up interviewing her and getting a statement from her.
But you didn't do that, did you?
I personally did not, no.
At no point through your investigation did you inform Detective Kahn that Ms. Rogers had paid you $10,000 prior to you showing up on August 15th.
No, I didn't mention any of my prior business dealings before this investigation.
And you didn't mention your current business dealings with Ms. Rogers at that time either.
No, I did not.
It's true to say that Ms. Rogers promised to pay you $25,000 for your work on those days.
That is correct. But I like to fancy myself a passive observer of the truth.
All right, Mr. Bond, well, let's move on to the truth that you found in the later parts of the investigation. And on August 21st, you mentioned that you had a search warrant.
Yes, that was the day that we were able to take a look through the house.
That's when you had returned to Lee Manor.
That is correct.
On that day, Detective Kahn was actually the one with the warrant to search the premises.
That is correct. Since Detective Kahn was a part of the police department, it was the police department that obtained the search warrant.
So you weren't listed as someone who was able to conduct that search warrant?
No, I was not.
Now, when Detective Kahn arrived, she asked Ms. Mars and Ms. Rogers to leave the house.
That is correct.
But Ms. Rogers asked Detective Kahn for you to be present for that search.
That is right. She asked me to be present to oversee any of the searching that was going on.
Well, let me clarify, Mr. Bond. Ms. Rogers asked Detective Kahn if you could be present. That true?
That's what Miss Rogers asked of Miss Kahn, correct.
She was adamant that you be present.
I believe she wanted me there to overlook any of the work that was going on, correct.
And Detective Kahn agreed.
That's right. The Midlands Police Department was happy to have me there helping out.
So you were the only person in Lee Manor while Detective Kahn conducted her search.
That is correct.
You were the only person there while she was searching Ms. Mars's room.
That is correct. I was the only person in Lee Manor with her while she was doing the search.
So you were the only person there when she found that bag with chloroandramine.
Yes, I was one of the first people to know that Detective Kahn had found that package of chloroandramine.
At that point, when she'd found that bag with the chloroandramine, you still had not told Detective Kahn that you'd broken into Drew Mars's room 6 days prior.
I did not tell her at that point, no, that I had an email from Miss Mars, no.
All right, thank you for your time, Mr. Bond. Your Honor, the defense has no further questions.
Any redirect from the plaintiff?
None, Your Honor. We just ask that Mr. Bond be excused.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bond. You can be excused. And am I correct that the plaintiff does not have any additional witnesses?
That's correct, Your Honor. This time we rest our case in chief.
All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Everyone, please remember that the video is being publicly broadcast on the YouTube live stream. So to the extent that you're going to step away, please make sure to mute your audio and stop your video.
I'll also jump in and say, I'm going to go ahead and sort the competitors into breakout rooms now by team. So you'll be able to speak with one another that way. So I'll be launching those right now. All right, it looks like our break time is now close to ending. So I'd love it if I could just really quickly check in with the judges and make sure that all of you guys are back and ready to proceed. So if you could turn on your cameras, all of you real quick, just so that I can confirm everyone's here. Doing a quick visual check. Good, okay, great. Looks, Max, are you here too?
Yes, I am here.
Awesome, all right. We can go ahead and proceed then. You guys can go ahead and turn off your cameras except for our presider, and I'll go ahead and close the rooms and the students will start coming back. All right, it looks like everybody is now back in the room. But so, Your Honor, whenever you're ready, we are prepared to proceed.
All right, thank you. At this time, does the defense have any witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Drew Mars to the stand.
All right, Ms. Mars, please come forward. And you've been presumed sworn. So whenever you're ready, you can proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
My name is Drew Mars.
And where do you call home, Miss Mars?
I live at Lee Manor. I used to live there with my employer, Agatha Lee, until she passed.
And how did you come to work for Miss Lee?
I was hired as her assistant caretaker in 2008 and became her full-time caretaker in 2009.
And what responsibilities did your job entail?
Agatha had a heart attack in 2008, so I was responsible for her physical therapy, delivering her medication, and other required nursing care. I was there to look after her.
How would you describe your relationship with Agatha Lee?
Working with Agatha was my first job, my only job. She was incredibly generous. I was primarily her professional caregiver, but over the years, we became very close. Living together, we played games, ate meals together, and she became more than just a patient. She was a grandma to me.
Do you know if Miss Lee had any family nearby?
2008 was a hard year for the Lee family. Agatha's only daughter and son-in-law died in a car crash in July, right when I started working for her. Agatha's granddaughter, Stevie Rogers, wasn't exactly nearby all that time, but Stevie is Agatha's only living relative.
And how would you describe Miss Lee's relationship with Miss Rogers?
To my knowledge, Stevie and Agatha grew very distant after the incident in 2008. When Agatha's daughter died, Stevie stopped coming to visit, stopped calling. It seemed to me that the distance broke Agatha's heart.
Objection as to lack of proper foundation. If I may be heard, Your Honor.
Yes.
The foundation for how Miss Mars would be aware of the relationship changes between Stevie Rogers and her grandmother has not yet been laid. So what we'd ask for that foundation to be laid before she testifies to specific relationship changes that she may have witnessed.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes, go ahead.
We've already laid the foundation for that period of time. Miss Mars lived with Agatha Lee, ate meals with Agatha Lee, and spent an abundance of time with Miss Lee. We've laid the foundation that she was around Miss Lee enough to make this testimony today.
May I respond?
Yes, one last response.
Simply being around a person isn't enough foundation to show that they'd be aware of the emotional changes that might be happening during that time. Specifically to testify that they were not in any communications anymore, we would need more foundation to show how she would be aware of what kind of communications they had in the past, whether or not they'd been texting or emailing, whether they were talking about what kind of relationship changes she was experiencing, what feelings she had towards her granddaughter. All of that kind of foundation could show that she was aware of a relationship change. But just the blanketed statement that they ate a lot of meals together doesn't lay the appropriate foundation that she would have personal knowledge of what that relationship was like.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
Yes, go ahead.
This witness said to her knowledge that Stevie Rogers stopped writing. That's well within her knowledge to say within her knowledge. And to the point that she ate meals and spent a lot of time together, she would clearly be able to tell the emotional toll that it took on Miss Lee. In fact, if I may proffer,
Go ahead.
I believe the very next thing that Miss Mars was going to tell us is that she'd see Agatha Lee crying because she never got a response from Stevie Rogers. We've certainly have enough foundation laid that she can testify to this. And given that she's going to testify to Miss Lee crying, there will certainly be enough foundation too.
All right. Well, I think she can testify to her observations. Let's confine it to what she saw and what she heard rather than her speculation about anyone's state of mind. But she can testify to what she observed during that time period. And I think the rest of it is proper foundation or fodder for cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Miss Mars, I'll ask that question again. What was the relationship between the two like?
Like I said, to my knowledge, Stevie stopped visiting. I never once heard Agatha talk to her on the phone. We would stay up late and talk about it, and Agatha would be crying. Stevie didn't come back to visit until July of 2018, a decade later. And that was right after Agatha had changed her will.
Now, did you know that Agatha had changed her will?
Yes, she wrote her first will in 2008, and I was actually a witness. When she changed it in February of 2018, she told me she decided to include me in her will.
What was your initial reaction when you were included in the will?
I felt undeserving. I grew up in a family that didn't have much money. We lived in a small home. I shared a bedroom with my sibling. My grandparents lived with us, and the idea of inheriting millions of dollars was odd.
While you worked for Miss Lee, did you remain close with your family?
Yes, absolutely. I sent the majority of my paychecks to them, almost everything. My youngest sister, Nina, was very ill, still is. So a lot of the money went toward medical treatment.
Miss Mars, I'd like to shift focus and talk about August 14th. Do you remember that day?
Yes, that was the last day I spent with Agatha.
And how did your day start?
I cleaned my room and did laundry for the household. Stevie had been making Agatha breakfast and she started staying with us. So afterwards, they went to go to the study.
Do you know what happened when the two of them went to that study?
No, but when I was going to get Agatha for her lunch appointment, I overheard some of their conversation.
Do you remember what that conversation was about?
Yes. Stevie brought up Agatha's will and asked to be put back into the will. Agatha told Stevie no, but Stevie persisted, and I remember Agatha clearly said, "I have missed you for years. I want to help you, which is why I will not give you a penny. Not now, not when I die."
Now, what happened after Miss Lee told Miss Rogers that she wasn't getting put back into the will?
Stevie rushed out the door, and when she saw me there, she whispered under her breath, "Don't count your millions just yet." After that, I took Agatha to lunch.
Did you join her?
No. I went to the drugstore for some toiletries with 3 people in the house. We were running low on some things.
Did you ever pick Miss Lee up from lunch?
Yes, we headed home and got there around 2 p.m.
And what happened once you got home?
Agatha went to take a nap, and later I made dinner for Stevie and Agatha, which I brought them around 6:30. After cleaning up downstairs, I was in my room around 7:30 and then went to sleep at 9:30.
Did you eat dinner with Miss Lee and Miss Rogers?
No, I took it downstairs that night. Agatha and Stevie were eating in Agatha's study, which connects to her bedroom.
Is that the last time that you saw Miss Rogers? Was that the last time that you saw Miss Lee?
That's the last time I saw her alive, right outside the bedroom with Stevie. The next morning when I went to wake her, I found she had passed. Even as a nurse, there was nothing I could do.
Miss Mars, what happened after you had discovered that Miss Lee had died?
I was in shock. Stevie called the police, and there was an investigation done by a detective from the police department. But before the police showed up, somebody that Stevie hired, a Mr. Bond, showed up to the house.
Were you present in court today for Mr. Bond's testimony?
Yes, I was.
And did you hear Mr. Bond say that he broke into your room on August 15th?
I did. I never gave him permission to go into my room. I didn't know who he was when he showed up that morning, and I didn't find out about it until a week later.
Do you know what Mr. Bond did in your room?
I have no idea.
Miss Mars, how involved were you in the police's investigation?
I tried to cooperate with the police as much as possible. After the autopsy revealed that Agatha had died from taking chloroandramine, I was shocked. I had never seen those pills in our house. When they asked to keep searching after that toxicology report, I had no problem with them looking around to find any answers.
You remember who all searched Lee Manor that day?
Detective Khan from the police department, and she gave Mr. Bond some sort of privileges. They were the only two I saw enter Lee Manor to investigate.
And do you know if Detective Khan watched over Mr. Bond while they searched through your house?
No, I don't. I have no idea what Mr. Bond did, but when they came outside, they had found a black bag with pills in my closet.
Miss Mars, did you own a black bag with pills inside of it?
No. When they showed me that bag, I had never seen it in my life. They found cigarettes, but I don't smoke. They found an unmarked bottle of pills, but as a nurse, I don't own anything like that. They said it was chloroandramine, but Agatha is allergic, so I make sure that's not even in the house and that everyone knows not to buy it. I felt like I was set up.
Miss Mars, were you involved in the death of Agatha Lee?
No. She was my boss, but after 10 years of living with her, she was family. I could never do something like that.
Thank you, Miss Mars. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor, but before I begin, I'd like to draw the court's attention to evidentiary ruling 13.
All right.
Now, this ruling states that both parties have agreed in today's case that there have been no constitutional objections to any of the searches conducted by both Mr. Bond and the Midlands Police Department, specifically including the search of Miss Mars' bedroom that they were just speaking about on direct examination.
And defense counsel, do you agree with that characterization of the ruling?
Yes, Your Honor, that's our understanding, and we were not making any constitutional objections to Mr. Bonds' unasked for search of Miss Mars's bedroom.
All right, understood. You can proceed with your cross-examination whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Miss Mars.
Good afternoon.
Now, I want to first start by talking about chloroandramine. Now, you talked a little bit about it on direct, but I want to dig a little deeper. Now, you'd agree with me that this is a heartburn medication.
That's typically what it's used for, yes.
You don't need a prescription to get it.
No, I make sure everyone in the house knows about it.
This is an over-the-counter medication.
That's right.
So anyone can just walk into a pharmacy and pick up a bottle.
That's right.
Now, you'd agree with me that on August 14th, you also went to a pharmacy.
Yeah, a drugstore.
Now, you acted as Agatha Lee's nurse for a good couple of years, right?
Yes, I was her primary caretaker for 9 years.
As her primary caretaker, you handled her medication.
That's right.
You set out her pill organizer.
Every Saturday night.
You made sure she took her medication every day.
She would just take it in the evenings before going to bed. I wasn't always there with her when she took it, but she was very responsible about it. Very good patient.
You certainly kept up to date to make sure that she was up on all of her medications.
Right. I would go with her to doctor appointments sometimes.
Miss Mars, you'd agree with me that one of the medications she took was for her arthritis.
Yes, that was 2 pills of Winterin. That was that regimen.
Let's talk a bit about that Winterin medication. You'd agree with me that a pill of Winterin was about the same size of a pill of chloroandramine.
That's right. They're essentially identical in color, taste, all of that.
They're the same shape,
Yes, that's what I just said. They're essentially identical.
the same dosage.
As long as the pills are the same dosage, then yes.
You'd agree with me that just by looking at one of those pills, it'd be hard to tell which medication it was.
Right. Most people would just be guessing if they were asked to identify it.
Ms. Mars, I want to turn your attention and talk a bit more about your financial situation, if that's all right. Now, you'd agree with me that you supported your family back home quite a bit
That's right. I sent them almost everything.
to help them pay for their rent.
Yes, medical, rent, everything.
You supported your parents,
Absolutely.
your grandparents,
It was an honor to.
and your little sister, Nina.
Yeah.
Now, leading up to 2018, your sister got pretty sick.
She had been sick her whole life.
Those medical expenses were starting to add up.
They'd always been there, yes.
And in 2018, you'd agree with me, your family was really starting to need more money.
That's right.
Now, you figured that once you got this inheritance money, you'd be able to help a bit more.
I didn't know when exactly that was, but that's what I planned to use it for.
You planned to use that inheritance money to take care of your little sister.
To take care of my whole family.
But in 2018, you started to worry that you were running out of time.
I never knew when Nina was going to get more sick. I was always running out of time.
You started to worry that your sister might pass before you got that inheritance money.
That's right.
She might pass before you could help.
That's right.
Ms. Mars, I want to turn your attention to Agatha Lee's will. Now, specifically talking about the will announcement, this was a couple of days after she passed, right?
That's right.
You were there with some police officers as well as Miss Rogers.
Yes, and Ryan Cabrera.
And that's when Agatha Lee's attorney made her announcement about the will's contents.
That's right.
She announced that you received everything.
That's right. It was a very emotional moment for everyone.
Now, in that moment, Miss Mars, you kept saying that you couldn't believe it.
That's right. I wanted to be sensitive to Stevie, who was also there.
You told everyone that you had no idea.
That's right.
Miss Mars, you'd agree with me that that wasn't true.
That's right.
It was a lie.
I had acted as if I didn't know to be sensitive.
You didn't tell the truth to the police that were there that day.
I don't think I spoke directly with the police that day.
You'd agree with me that Detective Khan was there during that will announcement.
Right.
And in front of Detective Khan, you said that you didn't know about the will when you did.
Right, for Stevie.
Well, there were some other reasons too, weren't there, Miss Mars?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, sure. You'd agree with me that part of the reason that you lied that day was because you didn't want the police to look into your motivations.
Right. Mr. Bond had just made many accusations toward me.
We'll get into that in a moment, but I want to talk about the reasons why you lied that day. You didn't want the police
Yes,
to
Your
do
Honor.
investigations into you.
Objection, Your Honor. Opposing counsel is testifying. Can I be heard?
Yes, briefly.
This witness never admitted to lying, and so for opposing counsel to say when you lied, you did this, she's testifying.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes, go ahead.
While we certainly don't have the benefit of a court reporter today, just a few moments ago, the witness agreed that she had lied when she didn't tell the truth intentionally to the police officers present. I'm simply not attorney testifying. The witness has already agreed to this characterization of events.
I do think the witness stated that she made a misstatement, perhaps for the benefit of Ms. Rogers, but that clearly could be characterized as a lie. Do you have anything further in response?
Just that she never stated specifically that she lied, and for opposing counsel to use that language when asking a question without ever getting this witness to say yes to that question is opposing counsel testifying, Your Honor.
Well, this is cross-examination. I think it's fair. I'll allow it. Overruled.
Now, Ms. Mars, you'd agree with me that part of the reason that you lied about your knowledge of the will was because you didn't want the police to investigate you any further.
Sure.
Part of the reason you lied is because you never wanted to be considered a suspect.
Sure.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Mars. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, counsel. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. May I inquire?
Yes, please do.
Miss Mars, did you need Agatha Lee's money to save your sister's life?
No, Nina's still alive today, doing well, I'm happy to report. And I've not received a dime of her estate.
Was your sister sick in 2015?
Yes, she was.
2014?
Yes, her whole life.
Thank you, Miss Mars. Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Any recross?
None, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Mars, you can be excused then, but you can remain. Does the defense have any additional witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Mr. Ryan Cabrera to the stand.
All right, Mr. Cabrera, please come forward. And you can proceed when you're ready.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Ryan Cabrera. It's spelled like Brian, but no B.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Cabrera?
I'm a biographer. I was never really great at making new friends through small talk, but over the years I learned that people love to talk about themselves, so that's what I do. I listen, and then I write and I write.
And what brings you to courtroom today, Mr. Cabrera?
Well, I was staying near Lee Manor interviewing the Agatha Lee. She was a legend to me, one of the best-selling authors in the history of Midlands.
All right, well, let's talk about your relationship with Agatha Lee. How'd you first two meet?
Well, in 2015, I decided to roll the dice and write Agatha's publishers, hoping to score a chance at a biography. Most people never write me back, but 3 years later, I got the go-ahead from her publisher and an invite to Lee Manor.
Now, when was the first time you met Ms. Lee in person?
Well, I got that reply letter on February 1st, 2018. I could never forget that day. A week later, I arrived on Agatha Lee's steps, excited to meet her. I hadn't been that nervous since high school prom. She answered the door, and that's when our friendship began.
So, was that the only time you met with Ms. Lee?
No. Over the spring and the summer, we continued to get to know one another.
How often would you two meet, would you say?
At least twice a week for about 6 months. We usually met in her study at Lee Manor. Nothing like a room full of books to make a nerd feel at home.
Now, what sort of things would the two of you discuss, Mr. Cabrera?
Well, we talked about all aspects of our life. What made us happy, what perplexed us. Agatha asked me about my life and my writing as much as I asked about hers. Eventually, Agatha even opened up to me about her granddaughter, Stevie, and her caretaker, Drew Mars.
I'd actually like to focus on those two a little bit, Mr. Cabrera. Let's start with Ms. Mars. Did you ever get the chance to meet Ms. Mars?
Yeah, I did.
Now, from your interactions, how would you describe Ms. Mars's relationship with Agatha Lee?
Well, they did a lot of things together, from gardening to backgammon. They were close. It was almost like Drew was Agatha's granddaughter. She would hold her hand on the stairs. The love and affection were obvious from both, I even remember early on Agatha telling me during one of our interviews that Drew was more than a caretaker. Drew was family.
Now, were you ever concerned at any points when you viewed Ms. Lee's relationship with Ms. Mars?
No, never. Miss Mars was always.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
May I be heard?
Yes, any response?
Under Rule 401, relevant evidence must have a tendency to make a fact of consequence more or less probable. Here, Your Honor, because this witness has seen some of the interactions between Agatha Lee and the defendant, in this case, Drew Mars, whether or not there was anything suspicious going on certainly has a tendency to make it more or less probable that she knowingly or purposefully caused the death of Agatha Lee. Therefore, this testimony is relevant.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Yes, go ahead.
This witness's level of concern about the interactions between Drew Mars and Agatha Lee is completely irrelevant and invades the province of the jury, and that's their decision to make.
I think he can testify about his observations and whether anything suspicious was going on, but let's keep it to his observations of what was said and what he was able to see of their interactions rather than his own personal feelings on the subject.
Yes, Your Honor. All right. Now, Mr. Rogers, I'd like to move on and talk about, excuse me, Mr. Cabrera, I'd like to talk about Ms. Rogers at this point. Did you ever get a chance to meet her?
Yeah, I first met Stevie at the beginning of July in 2018.
What was your impression of Agatha Lee's relationship with Ms. Rogers?
Well, the thing is that I had heard about Stevie well before she showed up on the doorstep of Lee Manor. The thing is, I not once had ever seen her. And the way that Agatha spoke about her, I got the sense that Stevie had put a lot of distance between herself and Agatha Lee. It made sense to me why Agatha wrote her granddaughter out of the will.
Well, Mr. Cabrera, you mentioned that Agatha Lee wrote Stevie Rogers out of her will. How do you know about that?
Well, she told me. Agatha did. I seen the letter myself.
You mentioned a letter. Do you think you'd recognize a copy of that letter if I were to show it to you?
Sure.
Your Honor, at this time, I am displaying what's previously been identified as Exhibit 10. At the moment, it is not in evidence, so we ask that it just be shown outside the eyeshot of the jury.
Yes, constructively, we will do that.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, is this that letter you were just referring to?
It sure is. I remember the date of it being February 1st, and I could recognize Agatha's signature anywhere.
Now, is this a fair and accurate copy of that letter?
Sure is.
Now, does it look like it's been changed in any way?
Nope, not besides it being digital.
All right, at this time, the defense moves to enter Exhibit 10.
Is there any objection from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor, to hearsay.
All right, response?
Yes, Your Honor. The statements in this letter fall under a few different issues. Firstly, some of them regarding Stevie Rogers being removed from Agatha Lee's will, those aren't in contention and have already been referenced several times in trial. Some of these statements aren't being used for the truth of the matter asserted, but are foundational to follow up regarding Mr. Cabrera's discussions with Agatha Lee and her relationship, again, with Stevie Rogers. Additionally, several of these statements deal with Ms. Lee's then existing mental, emotional state or physical condition as it relates to Stevie Rogers. And some of these statements are declarants unavailable statements regarding a personal or family history for a declarant that is not the person that is present.
Your Honor, may I clarify?
Yes, are you objecting to the entire document or just certain statements contained within it?
I'm objecting to the explanation given by Agatha Lee to why Miss Rogers was being removed from the will. We have no objections to any testimony about Miss Rogers being removed from the will, but we do object to the hearsay statements referencing her explanation on why Miss Rogers was removed from the will.
May I be heard on those grounds then?
Let me just understand concretely, are you saying then you object to the first sentence of the fourth paragraph, and that is your only objection.
I'm objecting to that entire paragraph.
The fourth paragraph. All right. What is the response from the defense?
Well, if we take it line by line, Your Honor, for the statements regarding, because we've become family in name only, I've decided to change my will. This is regarding Agatha Lee's then existing mental emotional state and how she felt regarding Stevie Rogers at the time in which she wrote this particular letter. The following statements regarding Drew being there for more than a decade through thick and thin, that information's been heard in trial so far. And then the following statements after that, we can redact those statements if the opposing counsel would prefer that.
You're offering, sorry, to redact the final sentence of paragraph 4?
Yes, Your Honor.
What is the plaintiff's response to that?
Your Honor, we'd be amenable to those paragraphs being, we'd be amenable to that being removed. Whereas the statements, even though they've been offered in court today about Drew being there for a decade, we'd still like those to be redacted too, because this information is still a hearsay document.
All right, I'll go ahead and redact the final sentence of paragraph 4 since the parties have agreed to do that. Otherwise, I'll overrule the objection. The rest of it does appear to be either testimony we've already heard or statements of her then existing mental state. Additionally, it appears that all of this would be relevant to the effect on Ms. Rogers. So the objection is noted but overruled, and will constructively redact the final sentence of the 4th paragraph per agreement of the parties.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, was there any other points in which Agatha Lee had mentioned will with regards to Stevie Rogers?
Yeah, I remember a conversation on a Tuesday, August 14th. We went out to lunch. Agatha got steak, but I just got a chickpea salad. Agatha had told me that Stevie was actually staying at Lee Manor. Agatha told me that Stevie had asked her for something that morning, but
Your Honor. Hearsay.
Response? Yes, I don't think I heard the full statement.
Yes, sorry.
The presence of the jury, can you make a proffer as to what Mr. Cabrera was going to state that Ms. Lee had said?
Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. You cut out for a moment for me. What was that?
Sorry. Could you make a proffer as to what Mr. Cabrera was going to testify to Ms. Lee saying?
Mr. Cabrera is going to testify to hearing a portion of, to Ms. Lee saying that she had a conversation with Stevie Rogers earlier that day in which she disinherited Ms. Rogers.
All right, and counsel for the plaintiff, I understand you're objecting to hearsay. Is there any?
Yes, that is correct, Your Honor.
Is there any response to the hearsay objection from the defense?
Your Honor, we've already heard this particular testimony. As Mr. Cabrera continues, he's going to discuss a little bit more information about this interaction, and it's foundational to it.
So are you not offering this for the truth of the matter asserted then?
That's correct, Your Honor. It's not used for the truth at the moment.
All right, in that case, I'll allow it with that limitation.
All right, Mr. Cabrera. Now, after she showed you that letter, when was the last time you spoke with Agatha Lee?
well, that was that conversation. That was our last one on August 14th at lunch. That's when Agatha had told me that Stevie had asked her for something, but that she had to say no. Agatha wouldn't tell me exactly what it was, but she said she felt good about her decision and that she hoped Stevie Rogers would forgive her.
Your Honor, I'd like to re-raise my objection for hearsay for that statement. I don't believe that they have laid any relevant subsequent action to this statement. It's just coming in for the truth of the matter asserted.
Yes, if you could explain what foundation is this going to lay for any further actions or interactions by Mr. Cabrera?
Just to clarify, Your Honor, we're referencing the statement prior in which Ms. Rogers had stated that Ms. Agatha Lee had stated that Ms. Rogers had been removed from her will.
Your Honor, may I clarify the situation?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm objecting to the fact that Cabrera is testifying to something that Agatha Lee told her was told to her by Stevie Rogers. Now, the initial statements by Stevie Rogers are not hearsay themselves, but the statements made by Agatha Lee recounting this information is hearsay. It's coming in to prove the truth of the matter asserted that Mrs. Rogers asked Agatha Lee for something that day, and she had to turn him down. This is clearly coming in for the truth of the matter asserted and should not be put on the record.
All right, I just wanted to clarify that, Your Honor. I was a little bit confused on the statements. For that particular statement, that is a statement of a plan, intent, or motive under Rule 8033. It shows Agatha Lee's then existing mental, emotional state or physical condition.
How is it a statement of her plan or intent? It sounded like he was recounting something that she had said about what had happened in the past.
If we're in reference to the statement, in hoping to have made the right decision at that moment.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is a fact remembered. This is not a statement of the current mental state of Agatha Lee. It's a fact remembered. It does not go into any sort of plan or intent, and therefore it does not fall under the exception defined by 8033.
So I'm going to sustain the objection as to the portion of the statement where he testified that Miss Lee said something about having to turn Miss Rogers or Stevie down. That to me does seem like it is not a statement of then existing or future mental state or intent. It is a fact remembered or believed. That objection is sustained and that portion will be stricken from the record.
All right, Mr. Cabrera, what happened after you last spoke to Agatha Lee?
Well, I went back home nearby. I wasn't staying at Lee Manor, and the next day I got the call.
What call, Mr. Cabrera?
The call from Drew Mars. She called me the day that Agatha passed, and she told me the news. We both cried on the phone.
All right, Mr. Cabrera. Now I'd like to move on and speak about what happened after Agatha Lee died. After she died, were you ever contacted by someone named Noura Khan?
Only once. A week after Agatha had passed, Noura Khan asked me to return to Lee Manor. I thought it was to tell her what I saw and what I heard on the 14th, but instead, someone else gave a speech accusing Drew Mars of murder. I think his name was Bond.
Now, do you know who this Bond person was, Mr. Cabrera?
No, but I found out later that they were some private investigator for hire. That struck me as odd because I initially thought that Bond was a cop.
Now, had you ever seen him before August 22nd?
No.
Did they ever interview you in connection to the death of Agatha Lee?
No, sir. We never spoke about what I saw on the 14th.
Did they ever ask you for a sworn statement?
No, sir.
Did they ever question you about Stevie Rogers?
Not at all.
Mr. Cabrera, did this Bond person ever contact you at all?
No. My only interaction with Mr. Bond was when he accused Drew Mars of murdering Agatha. The day after his speech, Drew Mars was in handcuffs.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cabrera. At this time, I have no further questions for this witness.
Okay, thank you, counsel. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cabrera. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. I want to start by talking about that lunch that you said you went through with Miss Lee on August 14th.
Sure.
Now, it's true that you paid the bill that day.
Yeah, I did.
And you offered to take out Agatha to lunch that Friday.
Yeah, I was feeling extra social that week.
But Miss Lee said she had plans already.
She did.
Miss Lee told you, well, she was planning on meeting with her attorney that Friday.
Yeah, she said she had that appointment on her calendar for a while.
Now I want to move on and talk about some interactions that you observed during your time at Lee Manor.
Okay.
Now, it's true that you were writing a biography on Agatha Lee.
Yeah, that's how I pay my bills, is I write biographies.
And while in the process of writing this biography, you often interviewed Miss Lee.
Yeah, we met for at least, twice a week for 6 months.
This meant that you were at Lee Manor a variety of different times.
Yeah, I mean, not all of our meetings were there. Some were in the study, but some, we went out to lunch.
But during your time at Lee Manor, you were able to observe the interactions between different people that lived at the house, correct?
Yeah, I saw Stevie, I saw Drew, and I saw Agatha, of course.
And now I want to specifically talk about an interaction you observed between Miss Mars and Miss Lee.
Okay.
Now, Miss Mars was administering medication to Miss Lee, correct?
Yep.
And she was explaining what medication she was currently administering.
I'm sorry, counselor. I'm confused at exactly what day you're talking about. As her caretaker, she was administering a medication, once a week.
Right, but I'll be specific. One of these times while she was administering this medication, she was explaining it, correct?
What month?
This was in June that month of 2018.
Oh, yeah, I remember that day.
And during this time, she was explaining what medication she was giving to Agatha Lee.
Yes, she was always pretty thorough.
And as she was going through this explanation, Miss Lee stopped her.
She did. She liked to interrupt.
She said, "You don't need to tell me what you're giving me. I'll take anything you give me."
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
Response.
Your Honor, this is going to the effect on the listener. Is not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted that she would have taken anything given to her by Miss Mars, but that Miss Mars knew that she had the trust within Agatha Lee that she would take anything that she was going to give her, which lays foundation for the potential that she would be able to switch the medication and Miss Lee wouldn't have done anything about it.
May I be heard?
Yes, go ahead.
Your Honor, if these statements aren't being taken for the truth and just for notice towards Drew Mars, I ask that a limiting instruction be placed so that these statements aren't taken for the truth by the jury.
All right, if they're not being offered for the truth, then I'll constructively give an instruction to the jury, either now or before deliberations, not to take this statement for its literal truth value, simply for the effect on Ms. Mars.
Mr. Cabrera, to be clear, Ms. Lee told Miss Mars she would take anything that she gave her.
Yeah, she trusted her.
Now I want to move on and talk about why you're testifying in court today.
Okay.
Now, it's true that in June of 2020, you spoke with Miss Mars, correct?
Yeah, we had a cell phone. It was nice because I don't get a lot of incoming calls.
And during this call, she asked you to testify on her behalf.
She did. She wanted me to be able to tell everyone what I saw.
And you agreed?
I did.
And that's why you're here in court today.
Yeah, I'm here to tell the truth.
Now, during this exact same conversation that Miss Mars asked you to testify on her behalf, she asked you something else.
She asked me how I was doing.
And she also asked you if you wanted anything from Lee Manor.
She did. She was still standing there at the house and didn't know if I had left any of my possessions in the study.
But you told her you wanted one of Miss Lee's possessions, correct?
Yeah, Miss Lee had this book collection that I was, entranced by.
Well, let's talk about why you were entranced by this book collection.
Sure.
Now, during that lunch you had with Miss Lee, you asked her why she only written one book.
Well, it's the greatest mystery of all time. She just vanished from the public.
And she told you, she hadn't just written one book.
No, she told me that she's written a bunch.
And the other books that she had written, they were stored in her private collection.
She said that some of them were in there, yeah, in the study where we used to meet.
And these books, they were unpublished.
That's true.
And Mr. Cabrera, to be clear, you thought that these books could be worth a lot of money.
That's true. I was nervous that the wrong person would just sell them off.
But directing you back to my question, you thought that these books were potentially worth a lot of money.
Yeah, Agatha was a great author.
What you would describe as an unfathomable amount.
priceless to me.
Let's clarify this and let's tie this up. You were told that you would receive these books by the defendant if she won today's case, correct?
Yes.
No further questions.
All right, thank you. Any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor.
Yes.
Mr. Cabrera, are you testifying here today for the exclusive reason of receiving Agatha Lee's old books?
No, counselor. I'm a successful biographer. I have plenty of money of my own. I'm here to tell the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. I have nothing further for this witness, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cabrera. You can step down. Does the defense have any additional witnesses?
With that, Your Honor, the defense rests its case in chief.
All right, great. Assuming we're doing okay on all lost time, we can take another brief break, I believe, before closing arguments, or we can proceed directly into closings. It's your call. Please just let me know.
So that's something that's up to Your Honor's discretion. So normally in the other rounds, we haven't been doing that, but if that's something that you want for this particular round, we can do that.
No, that's fine. We can go ahead and proceed, assuming no one needs a restroom break or anything like that. If we're ready to proceed with closings, then we'll hear first from the plaintiff. This is just a reminder to switch, again, using the button in the upper right from speaker view, or excuse me, from gallery view back to speaker view, so that you'll see the advocate making the closing argument on the full screen. We'll give him just a quick second to do that.
Of course.
If we're ready to proceed.
Your Honor, before we begin closings, can we take just a moment to confirm that the timekeeping on both sides is accurate?
Yes, I believe the bailiff probably knows better than I do, certainly. But yes, if you want to take a moment to confirm that, either in the chat or just in open court, that's fine.
Yeah, timekeepers, if you'd like to connect now by chat and coordinate with your closers, please let them know what their times are going to be.
Okay, perfect. Looks like both sides agree that the plaintiff has about 10 minutes and 30 seconds left. And we can certainly, time keep ourselves from there. And I think with that, we're ready to proceed.
Okay. And I don't know how things work in this jurisdiction, but do you intend to reserve any time for rebuttal out of that 10 minutes and 30 seconds?
Within the Midlands jurisdiction, we don't have to reserve a specific allotment of time. It's just whatever is left over, we're allowed to use for rebuttal, which I do intend to do in this case.
Okay, great. At this time, then we'll proceed to hear the closing argument from plaintiff counsel. Please proceed whenever you're ready.
Members of the jury. When she was getting ready for bed on August 14th of 2018, Agatha Lee was happy. She had finally had a chance to reconnect with her granddaughter. She was grateful for every day they spent together, every meal they could share, every game they could play, for every extra chance to say, I love you. Sure, Stevie wasn't perfect, but she was family. So as Agatha Lee went to bed on that night, she was excited for whatever adventure the two of them would get up to in the morning. But that next day never came. You see, what Agatha Lee didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known, was that the defendant had switched out her medication for something deadly. That the defendant was out of time and out of options. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the defendant's actions that bring us here today. Now, here in Midlands, there's a rule called the Slayer Statute. Now, what this rule means is that if somebody kills another person, they're not allowed to collect any type of inheritance from their victim. And that's the law that governs this trial here today. In this case, the plaintiff, Stevie Rogers, has brought a claim against the defendant, Drew Mars. And in bringing this claim, we, the plaintiff, took on a burden of proof. Now, all that means is that throughout today's trial, we had to prove one thing to you today, that it was more likely than not. That it was more likely than not that the defendant intentionally killed Agatha Lee. So let's go through today's trial to see how we've met our burden and to understand how the defendant was out of time and out of options. We can start with the reason why the defendant committed this crime. Today, we got a chance to hear a lot about Agatha Lee's will. You heard today that she left everything to the defendant back in February of 2018, that she left her estate, her bank accounts, her book, every single piece of property that she had. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard that this was something the defendant needed. Now, this wasn't just out of greed, but you heard today that the defendant had a family to support. She told us today on cross-examination that she sent a majority of her paychecks, almost everything she had, back home. That she was taking care of her parents, her grandparents, her sick siblings. That she was trying to cover all of their expenses. And that by 2018, it was getting too much. That her family needed more than she could provide for. But the defendant had hope. You see, she told us that once she was promised that inheritance, she had a plan for that money. That she hoped that with that money, she could take care of her family, that she could pay for the medical treatments her sister needed. But she was worried she was running out of time. She was worried that her sister would pass before she could receive that money. But then that inheritance was put even more at risk. We heard today from Miss Rogers that on August 14th, she had a conversation with her grandmother about the will. That Agatha Lee had changed her mind and promised that she was going to change everything from going to the defendant to going back to her granddaughter. A conversation that the defendant overheard. And once she realized that she wasn't just running out of time, but that this money could be gone forever, ladies and gentlemen, she was out of options. She knew that if she wanted to take care of her family, she needed to act fast. That she needed to kill Agatha Lee before she had a chance to change her will. So she hatched a plan. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard today that the defendant was aware of Agatha Lee's allergies. That after acting as her nurse for nearly 9 years, she knew that chlorandramine was deadly to Agatha Lee. She knew it looked exactly like her arthritis medication. She even told us today that just by looking at one of those pills, you wouldn't be able to tell whether it was the arthritis medication or a deadly poison for Agatha Lee. She told us that she knew how easy it would be to acquire this substance, that you could just walk into a pharmacy and buy a bottle. And members of the jury, that's exactly what she did on August 14th. She told us that she went to the pharmacy after overhearing this conversation. Now, she didn't tell us that she bought the pills. But members of the jury, we know that she did. Because that night she went back to Lee Manor, she switched out the arthritis medication, and she waited for Agatha Lee to be dead by morning. We know that's what happened because the murder weapon was found in the defendant's possession. Today, you got a chance to hear from Investigator Bond. He told you that throughout his investigation, working with the Midlands Police Department, when they had a search warrant and looked through the defendant's closet, they found a bottle of chloroandramine in her closet. Something that the defendant told us on cross-examination she had never seen, would never own, and would never bring into her house because she knew how dangerous it was. Now, allow me to make something clear. In a moment, the defense is going to have a chance to speak with you. And I'm sure they're going to try to convince you somehow that this evidence was planted by Investor Bond. But ladies and gentlemen, before they even try, I want you to take a moment to think about how preposterous that is. That somehow Agent Bond was able to plant evidence while working with the Midlands Police Department, a search conducted by Detective Kahn. But even more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we know for sure that the defendant had brought those pills into her house because her fingerprints were found on it. And that was something discovered by Detective Kahn, not even by Investigator Bond. If these pills had really been planted by Miss Rogers or Mr. Bond, like the defense is going to try to tell you, how would the defendant's fingerprints be on? The story they're going to try to sell you doesn't add up. You see, as members of this jury, it's your job when you go back to deliberate to look at the evidence that we've presented today. And when you go back, I want you to follow through on the motivation the defendant had to commit this crime. She was running out of time. I want you to look at the access and opportunity the defendant had. Because she even told us today that she knew how dangerous that poison would be, how easy it would be to get it, and knew that she was the sole person responsible for giving Agatha Lee her medication. I want you to follow the evidence that connects the defendant to this crime. Members of the jury, follow the fingerprint. The defendant had those pills. Members of the jury, the defendant was out of time and out of options. And when giving the choice of saving her younger sister or killing Agatha Lee, she picked family. Hold the defendant accountable for her actions and find her liable. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll now hear a closing argument from the defense.
May it please the court. Distanced, disinherited, and desperate. On February 1st, 2018, Agatha Lee sent a letter to Stevie Rogers. She told her granddaughter that she was being removed from her will. But not only that, she told her granddaughter that she'd become family in name only. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know today that this was a long time coming. We know that for 7 years, Stevie Rogers never spoke to Agatha Lee. For 7 years, Stevie Rogers never wrote to Agatha Lee. For 7 years, she never visited. She never gave any sort of affection, never responded to a single letter, never showed any interest. After those 7 years, Agatha Lee had gotten fed up. She was done. She disinherited Stevie Rogers. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we learned that after that happened, everything changed. That it was because Ms. Rogers became disinherited that she became desperate. Now today, the plaintiff has charged Ms. Drew Mars, longtime nurse and caretaker of Agatha Lee, with having caused Agatha Lee's death. Specifically, they're charging her under the Slayer statute. Now, that's a little different than a murder case or even a wrongful death, because that means that Stevie Rogers, the person whose complaint against Drew Mars, it means that Stevie Rogers, if she is able to show that Drew Mars knowingly or purposefully killed Agatha Lee, that means that Stevie Rogers will get everything. I want you to remember back to the cross-examination that Mr. Ecker did on Ms. Rogers. Mr. Ecker asked Ms. Rogers about her background, about the work that she did. And Ms. Rogers, well, she told Mr. Ecker that she hadn't held a job, that she'd been traveling the world, and that she'd been using up her trust fund. Today, the burden of proof in today's case lies with the plaintiff. It's their burden to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that Drew Mars caused the death of Agatha Lee. Now that means they can't just tell you that it's possible that she caused that death. Can't just say that it's likely. No, they have to show you that it's more likely than not that Drew Mars caused that death. We, as the defense, we don't have a burden of proof. We didn't have to call any witnesses, question anybody, present any evidence, but we did. We called 2 witnesses. We presented several pieces of evidence. And we told you about what really happened on August 15th, 2018. The day after Agatha Lee died. Because on August 15th, Stevie Rogers hatched a plan. Earlier in trial today, you heard Mr. Weiberg say to look for somebody who had the motive, the means, and opportunity, and you'd find the person who was liable. Let's go through the motive, the means, and the opportunity that Stevie Rogers had and took to kill Agatha Lee. Remember, Ms. Rogers was short on cash. She'd run out of money and she had no prospects. Her only option was Agatha Lee. Her only option was to make sure that she was brought back onto the will of Agatha Lee, estimated at nearly $25 million. But when Agatha said no, when Agatha rejected Ms. Rogers' request, ladies and gentlemen, her plan went into motion. She showed how desperate she really was. Remember, she admitted that she'd already known about the Slayer statute, the statute through which she is raising a complaint against Ms. Mars today, well before Agatha Lee had died. That statute states that if she's able to prove that Drew Mars caused the death of Agatha Lee, that she gets all of that $25 million estate. Ladies and gentlemen, for someone that became family in name only, that's motivation enough. But let's look beyond that. Let's look at how someone could do it, because remember, Ms. Rogers, she's not an investigator, she's not a police officer, she has no job skills. Ms. Rogers did, though, have one thing. Ms. Mars did not. She had Mr. Bond. Investigator Minstrel Bond, who she'd paid $10,000 already to track down Agatha Lee, who she'd promised $25,000 once he arrived right on time at August 15th, 2018. Bonds was her means of committing a crime. So let's look at what opportunities that she had. Let's look at what opportunities they had. Because while Mr. Bond said that he was working in a dual detective capacity, really, it was a criminal accomplice capacity. Because on August 14th, 2018, Mr. Bond was the only person that was unaccounted for when someone purchased chloroandramine pills. You're going to see today the police report of Detective Nora Khan. And Detective Khan's report tells you that she never checked to see whether Bond was seen purchasing chloroandramine. She checked to see if Mars was, if Rogers was, even if Lee herself was, but not Mr. Bond. You know already that Mr. Bond had broken into the room of Drew Mars, that Mr. Bond was the only one present during the search of Ms. Mars's room, and the only one present during the search of that entire house, aside from Detective Khan. Mr. Bond had the opportunity to plant fingerprints and plant a bag with chloroandramine in the room of Drew Mars. Because of that opportunity that was taken, you cannot find Drew Mars liable. Because Stevie Rogers was distant, disinherited, and desperate. Thank you.
All right, thank you, counsel. Any rebuttal from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, please do.
Members of the jury, the only evidence the defense could muster up to try to prove to you today that Mr. Bond and Miss Rogers worked together in some elaborate conspiracy was that Mr. Bond was paid to do his job. Now, the defense didn't have a burden in today's trial. They didn't have to prove anything to you. But when they put forward an alternative theory, it's your job as members of this jury to realistically look at the assumptions they're asking you to make, to dig into the argument they're trying to sell you. And when you do that, it's going to become clear that they're grasping at straws. You see, because we know who did this crime. Members of the jury, I want to bring you back to the cross-examination of the defendant today. I want you to remember when she told us that she lied to the police on the day the will was announced. I want you to think about why. But ladies and gentlemen, you don't even need to ask that question because the defendant, well, she told you. She said she lied to the police because she didn't want them to investigate her. That she didn't want the police to realize the motivation she had for committing this crime. That she was standing to gain $25 million. And on the exact same day that Agatha Lee said she was going to take that money away, she wound up dead in her bed in the middle of the night. I agree with the defendant that that's pretty suspicious. Members of the jury, the defendant told us today that the reason she lied was because she didn't want to be a suspect. Because once she was and the police started looking into her, that's when they found the chloroandramine in her closet with her fingerprints on it. Follow the evidence, and it'll become clear. The defendant was out of time and out of options. Find her liable for her crimes.
All right, thank you. The case is submitted now. We're just going to take a quick moment to complete our ballots.